Listeners, readers, welcome to the Foxed page, where we dive deep into the very best books. It's also, apparently, recently, the place where I'm giving myself full rein to explore these concepts that just come at me from nowhere and turn into total obsessions. Today we are going to talk about something called evocative objects. As I am saying that, I'm realizing it sounds actually much more provocative than I mean it to sound. But this is a concept that actually solved kind of a long-standing mystery for me, and I cannot wait to share all of my research behind it. And mystery might be actually a little bit too strong a word, but what this concept did is deepen my appreciation for why I like to have certain objects around me at any given time. If you're like me, maybe on your kitchen windowsill, you have a little assortment of things, or perhaps if you have a desk, you have some objects on the desk that are evocative. So the way that this appreciation was deepened was that I was listening, yet again, to the 10% Happier podcast by Dan Harris. And it was actually the same lecture with Annie Murphy-Paul where she spoke about gestures. And the other thing they talked about was that it's a good idea if you are trying to be productive or creative to have certain items around you that make you feel creative. But what she said next was the thing that was truly interesting to me. What she said is that when we tend to have objects around us, for the most part, they can fall into categories, and two of the categories are cues of identity or cues of belonging. So all of a sudden, the shell or the little ceramic dog that is sitting on my windowsill made much more sense to me. And honestly, I have always imbued these things with a lot of appreciation. And if you pushed me, I could probably get to that place. But for some reason, I really liked the idea of these things as having even more power than I thought. It was also interesting to think about whether these things were reflecting my identity back to me and other people, or whether it was an object that gave me a sense of belonging. And then I was like, wait, belonging to what? I also liked this concept because it sort of elevated these objects that I have around me from being something like a knick-knack or a tchotchke, which leads us to the title of today's talk. As you might imagine, knick-knack is a very, very old word. It comes from the late 16th century, around 1570. And at that point, it was mostly just knack. And it was K-N-A-C-K. Those of you who have listened to my musings on the Anglo-Saxon versus the Latin will recognize that that is an Anglo-Saxon word. And you'll also recognize that a knack is like a little skill. So a knick-knack became the word for like a little clever device that might help you, with whatever it is that you have a knack for. Then the clever device kind of got demoted to the idea of some sort of trinket. In my mind, knick-knack and tchotchke are almost the same, but those of you who listen to the talk on language know that in order for us to be preserving different words that mean the same sort of thing, they usually have some sort of subtle difference. In my mind, a tchotchke is like a little bit less amazing than a knick-knack. So tchotchke comes from an obsolete Polish word via Yiddish and was brought to the United States in the early 1900s, but apparently became much more commonplace in the 1970s. Knick-knack and tchotchke both have developed through something called doubling. So as I said, knack was just a single word, and it became knick-knack because it was like a little bit of a diminutive, making the word kind of childlike and light. Same with tchotchke, which has the double CH sound, T-C-H-O-C-H-K-E. Wow, that was difficult. Was that even correct? And those kinds of doubling are often very childlike. You can think of it in baby language, babies, dada and mama and nana. And so I like the idea of these words both as having this doubling, even though they've come from very different places. We then have, of course, the French version. We have the Latin version, and that is objet d'art. That was so odd the way I just said that. How would I say it? Objet? I think I would say objet in English, objet d'art. I always feel a little pretentious when I just really go hard on the accent. But what this is a word that we have borrowed just lock, stock, and barrel. We just took the whole entire word, didn't even bother changing it. It is obviously a French word for an object of art. Originally, it was sort of like for a small statue or a small vase. Wow, vase really just fell right in line with objet d'art. Now we think of it as a small object, like a little figurine, but also it can be, in my usage, it can be sort of any one of these objects that we have around. Although, yes, definitely something that has a little bit to do with art. You might imagine, and you imagine correctly, that we have a lot of books around here. There was a period of time where I just wanted stacks and stacks of books everywhere. I wanted bookcases on every single wall. This was when my children were young or when I was in graduate school. And my thesis is that I was trying so hard to maintain some sort of professional identity, which was actually not going very well. And so I feel like I needed all of those books, plus my 3 diplomas. It is not everyone who has to, frame and hang their diplomas. But again, these are objets. In fact, in that case, it's actually sort of a work of art. And it actually has a lot of beautiful Latin on it. But all of that, if we're thinking about identity, it was in order to bolster my identity as an academic, and also, in fact, to remind me that I belong, kind of somewhat, to the world of academia. But at some point, maybe because I just was like a little more resigned, or maybe because I was a little more comfortable in my professional identity, I started getting kind of tired of books. I was once deeply offended because our real estate agent, this was a long time ago, she told me that you never want to have bookcases just full of books because it looks too heavy. Now I kind of get it. So in our house, we spend most of the time in the family room. Honestly, we spend most of our time watching television. And when I'm watching television, it's set into a bookcase that has not actually very many books. It, in fact, has quite a few objets. A couple of them are things that do also still reinforce the idea of me as an academic. One are these incredible bookends of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. That is the perfect segue into another one of these items. This is a piece of art that one of my children made. It was a piece of brown cardboard, and onto it he had glued a bunch of nuts and bolts and screws and whatnot, and it truly looked amazing. And my friend Amy saw it and she's like, dude, you need to put that on your wall. So it's not quite on the wall, but it is on the bookcase. I'm not just throwing up any art by any child because, let's be honest, there's a lot of really, am I going to say bad? I'm going to say bad. There's a really lot of bad art that your kids end up creating. But I saved a couple of choice things. And I think sometimes these objects are important to me in particular because I am a real homebody. I am someone who really likes to be in her house. And there was a long period of time where I felt kind of guilty about doing things that were making my house feel beautiful, partially because sometimes it's expensive to do those things. And I kind of felt like kind of superficial and trivial and a little wasteful that I wanted to be surrounded by beauty. Around that time, I was saved by Alain de Botton. Alain de Botton is a writer. I love his work. One of the things he wrote is called The Architecture of Happiness. And this book was such an eye-opener for me. The basic thesis is that it is important to surround yourself by things that you find beautiful. He says this: we need a home in the psychological sense as much as we need one in the physical, to compensate for a vulnerability. We need a refuge to shore up our states of mind because so much of the world is opposed to our allegiances. We need our rooms to align us to desirable versions of ourselves and to keep alive the important evanescent sides of us. I love this so much. And honestly, I think you could kind of transfer all of those thoughts right onto the idea of these objects that we keep around. I'm going to extend Annie Murphy Paul's idea about these objects just a little bit now. This also has to do with identity and belonging, but I would add the idea of remembrance, that there's certain things that remind us as like a souvenir or a memento. I do that kind of stuff. I literally have a ticket stub or some beach glass, whatever, glass from the ocean. And what I would say about that is that at some point, I always forget where it's from. I'm just like, wait, what was that a memento of? And as soon as that happens, I give myself full permission to get rid of that thing. The other thing, and this is very important, I at some point realized that it is not good to have stuff around you that gives you a bad feeling, whatever that feeling might be. There would sometimes be a gift from someone. I'm thinking of something from my mother. My mom and I were very, very close, but we had a complicated relationship. And she would give me something and it would be sitting there because it was something that was kind of objectively beautiful and it was something that I should love. And every time I would walk by and look at it, I would either feel guilty or just yuck. And you know what I did? Got rid of it. So I am giving you full permission right now to just really check in with yourself. When you're walking by something, if you get a little bit of a yuck feeling, feel totally free to get that thing out of your life. This is maybe very important given that we are in the season of giant consumerism and so much gift giving. I will also give you permission right now that if someone gives you something and you don't like it, you can thank them and you can think of it as a hug. That person did this nice thing for you. They thought of you. They did the gesture. And I don't mean hand gestures, although I am making some doozies of hand gestures over here. But they did this nice thing for you. You can just be like, oh my gosh, wow, it's like a hug. And then you can get rid of that thing. You can give it away. You can regift. You can throw it in the garbage. And that is a very good segue into kind of a mindset that I really, really love. And it turns out that I have always embodied. I am someone who is very good at purging. I think it's because when I went to college, it was in New Hampshire and I lived in California, and getting back and forth was so rough, and having to store stuff there. My sister and I both went to Dartmouth College. We both have terrible nightmares about like having to get our stuff up into these weird attic spaces that they would give you, and then like not being able to find our stuff and missing flights. So I tend to be kind of minimalist. And also as, the head of my household and a mother of 3, I was very, very good at keeping things moving through the house. I, of course, was so justified and felt so seen and so affirmed when the whole phenomenon of Marie Kondo came out. The idea of holding something and just thinking to yourself, like, does this spark joy? Does this thing spark joy? If it does not spark joy, you thank it for its service and you get rid of it. I have to say, I did do a lot of things. Like I would pick up like a soccer, shin guard that was like sitting on the floor somewhere, and I would hold it up and be like, does this spark joy? I do not think this sparks joy, which sometimes my kids thought was funny and sometimes did not. But honestly, like if there's shin guards on the floor, that's on them. I also really liked the idea recently of this like Swedish death cleaning, which is that idea of like not giving your children just like mountains and mountains of junk to deal with after you die. But of course, it is also kind of like a good way to move through life. I mean, I think it's an amazing idea to save a few things, to have your things around you that make you feel like you belong and give you a sense of identity. But I also think it's a very good idea to be selective, to really put some thought into it. So again, I'm recording this in the beginning. Wow, no. It is the middle of December. Yikes. But maybe this is something to think about as we move toward the holidays. Because there's so many things, like objects that we have at Christmas time. I think probably less so for Hanukkah, given that it's not like a major high holiday. But we have certain things that we see that feel very nostalgic and bring us lots of joy. Surround yourself with that kind of object. But also, when someone gives you something and it is not sparking joy, feel totally free to allow that thing to move right through your life. So once again, I want to thank you for giving me a little forum to really think for a bit and to kind of psychologize about why these objects that I surround myself with are not simply, vanity, and it's not just consumerism, and it's not that even that they're beautiful in some sort of like generic way. These are things that really do enforce identity and belonging in ways that I think are so powerful. So thank you so much for listening. Happy reading.